Do I like Marvel movies? No. Have I seen most of them? Yes. Did I cry at Endgame? Yes. MCU is part of a genre of media that I like to call had potential, but it was completely demolished by the executives. This genre includes such favorites as the Star Wars sequels, Disney animated reboots, Disney movies in general. When you look at concept art for hugely marketable films, we find some things that are very creative, very unique, and very, very exciting artistically. Instead of the cash grab that we expect, we find innovative, unique, and creative ideas. And then they are ultimately destroyed by the wheels of capitalism. We find real stories with real heart and unique ideas and artistic potential. The original narrative, for example, with Frozen, where Elsa played the role of the antagonist, and the sisterly relationship between Anna and Elsa, and the strain on that sisterly relationship was explored more in the cut song, Life's Too Short. We see a morally complex and a much more complicated narrative than the one that we are ultimately ending with. And I think the same can be said about Marvel movies. Marvel comics and comics as a whole are a really great example of this genre, because the genre has a long and complicated relationship with censorship. Censorship of the comics was a huge thing. This relationship continues to perpetuate into the modern day, as movies are meant to sort of appeal to a very large audience. The recent Loki show, I think, is a great example of this, and I say this as somebody who enjoyed conceptually Loki show. The show itself had a lot of potential. It was a setup for the new wave of Marvel movies after Endgame. It was something that focused on an antagonist that honestly has a lot of very, very interesting moral complexities. But the show itself ultimately ended with the blatant mischaracterization of 2012 Loki. The fact that it had self-cessed, and the fact that the executives ultimately didn't listen to Tom's suggestions, and the fact that there are rumors that the executives had not really been familiar with the content of Marvel movies and Loki as a character. And really, the show fell far flat from what a Loki-led narrative really could have looked like. The problem exists in Marvel movies because executives are oftentimes not familiar with their source material. And so we get stuff like Thor's wildly shifting characterization through movies, as we see different directors and different executives approach his character completely differently. And we see Steve Rogers' happy ending, quote unquote, that directly contradicts the core themes of his narrative and his movies even. And even there's a comic that literally explores this idea of Steve going back into the 50s, and he realizes that the future is better and that he's romanticizing a time period that is gone. I'm not mad at these adaptations because they're not quote-unquote comic accurate, because comics have a million different storylines and a million different universes. So I'm glad for character differences in between the universes, and I'm glad for a unique take on characters, but they're not cohesive as a narrative is the problem. The Marvel movies, though they stand on their own as individual films, They're supposed to be a collective, but because of the fact that the characterization switches constantly between the movies, and because of that fact that the writers or that the executives aren't familiar with the movies prior, makes the whole thing completely incomprehensible even when you remove it from the context of the source material. Too often executives focus on what makes a movie appealing and forget about the fact that a movie has to be good. That to happen, a movie needs to tell a good story. And for a story to be good, the story probably won't connect with everyone. Art connects with people. Good art connects with people. And oftentimes the best art is unique, is art that pushes the boundaries of what its content is, and that is not based on the familiar archetypes and character models to make toy producing easier. But the thing is, when these companies do, quote unquote, take risks and do advocate for art that pushes boundaries, they purposely design it so that those risks will fail. End of 2D animation as a popular form of movies was purposeful. The end of the golden age of Disney movies and the end of 2D animated films were specifically released at times when other very popular movies were being released in order to make sure that they were box office failures. Shang-Chi, the first movie to feature a largely, almost completely Asian American cast, received virtually no marketing, to the point where the main actor of the film is the one who is advocating the most for people to watch this movie. The actor. That's not his job. The company should be advertising the movie, but they're not, because they don't want it to do well, because they don't want to create art that pushes boundaries. These corporations use these failures as evidence as to why they shouldn't take risks, in order to keep falling into these stereotypes and these archetypes and this pattern of content. And they use them as models for why they shouldn't take risks, despite the fact that the reason that these movies fail were premeditated. Even despite all of this, it is the movies that do take risks that are the ones that are the most remembered. Into the Spider-Verse is probably the most iconic and the most beloved take on superhero comics in an animated movie. Laika Studios still stands as a pretty strong contender in the animation field, despite the fact that the entire studio revolves around the idea of experimental animation, of stop motion animation, of a technique that is very, very old, and of pushing the boundaries of what that animation can look like. Missing Link won a Golden Globe despite its box office failure, and I really do think it's a shame that it was a box office failure, because it was an absolutely delightful movie. Guess what? That can be attributed to a lack of marketing. For proper cinematography and proper film, well, I'm less familiar with that because, to be honest, I'm not a cinephile. Inside by Bo Burnham saw massive success, despite the fact that it is a completely unique style of filming, and despite the fact that it's a very meta, it's a very new type of cinematography. And even older stuff like Star Trek series as a whole was something that pushed boundaries. It purposely had a very diverse cast. It purposely pushed for exploration of real world problems. And it obviously stands today as one of the greatest pieces of sci-fi media. I really do wish I could love Disney. But I can't. And obviously I think there's ethical dilemmas there. And we can go over the questionable behavior and the fact that they're acting sort of as the monopoly and anti-capitalism and the treatment of workers, and we're all familiar with these discussions, and if you're not, you really should look into it. But my gripe with them as an artist is that despite intending to be this machine of creativity, this creation of artwork, in reality they've done nothing but destroy what makes art art. Luca, honestly, is probably the only example I can think of in recent years of Disney doing something that is wholly unique, that is not based on previous material, that is not a rebooted film of one of their movies in the past in order to regain the copyright over the characters. It's just been retelling after retelling, reboot after reboot, as they dig in their heels and reclaim their copyright and continue to fall into the same marketable, profitable, and completely devoid of any heart movies that they continue to create. Nothing is new anymore, nothing is art anymore, nothing is a story anymore. It's just the same fucking shit. So much for the happiest place on earth. So much for all your dreams come true, because at the end of the day, it isn't about the stories. It's about how much money they can make.